Good evening, everybody. Well, I guess it'll be morning when you're watching this, but it's evening right now. It's 6:34. Anyway, got the lights on, got my tea with my new Christmas mug, so we're ready to get started with reading My Family Divided, Chapter 4. Chapter 4, Underground. When you're the child of undocumented immigrants, you learn to keep your mouth shut. Someone wants to know where your family is from? It's none of their friggin' business. You know how gossip works. We didn't want word to spread. Nuestra situación no está resuelta, my father frequently told me. Our situation isn't settled. The funny thing is that the fear of standing out for not being a citizen made him behave like a model citizen. Poppy was careful out in the world, never saying anything that might suggest he was undocumented. The worst thing that could happen would be drawing the attention of the police or other authorities, and so he followed laws perfectly, never running yellow lights or speeding. Our lives revolved around Mommy and Poppy's quest for citizenship. They were constantly strategizing about how to get their papers, or arguing about whether they ever would. In 1986, the year I was born, the Immigration Reform and Control Act was passed. It allowed immigrants who'd entered the country illegally before 1982 to apply for amnesty, which is a pardon from the government. Mommy saw it as an opportunity to finally get legal status. Let's file our papers, she pleaded with my father. Poppy, ever the reluctant one, tried to talk her out of it, but Mommy filed anyway. She was denied. Dad later applied himself, but was too scared to follow up with the process. He worried that if he gave his name and story to the authorities, he'd be handcuffed and immediately deported for having overstayed that 90-day visa. Yes, being granted amnesty could mean becoming legal residents in the country, but being rejected could mean being torn away from the family and thrown into prison. Like so many others around us, my dad just wanted to do the right thing to keep us together. In the spring of 1997, when I was almost 11, a woman in the neighborhood gave Poppy a tip. I know a lawyer who can do all the paperwork for you, she told him, handing him the attorney's business card. You should go see him. I've heard he's good. He's a Harvard Law School graduate. That evening, over supper, my father pulled the card from his wallet and slid it across the table toward Mommy. He smiled. I'm going to check out this guy tomorrow, he told her. My mother was surprised. She picked up the card, turned it over a couple of times, and brought it right up to her face. She then lowered it and ran her fingertips across the gold embossed lettering. This looks good, she said. How do you know this guy? You know Betty, the Guatemalan woman at the end of the block, he said. She heard that this lawyer is helping people get their green cards. My mother beamed. Good, she said, setting aside the card to begin clearing the dishes. Maybe Diane can go with you. Everyone has a helpful job in a household, and this was Eric's and mine, translating English. Neither of my parents speaks English fluently. Not that they didn't try. In fact, my dad wanted to learn it so badly that, over the years, he took classes and practiced into the wee hours. But as a teenager, he'd lost hearing in his left ear while working in a sugarcane plant. Picking up the language was hard, and he was shy about speaking it. Mommy's skills were stronger, but she didn't understand everything. Eric and I translated everything, from electric bills to ingredients on food packages. We accompanied my parents to medical appointments to explain to them what their doctors were saying. So for Poppy's visit with the attorney, I definitely need to tag along. And besides, I was Poppy's buddy. He took me almost everywhere. All right, we're going to answer the first question, everybody. What was Eric and Diane's job growing up? Pay attention to these few sentences right here. Everyone has a helpful job in a household, and this was Eric's and mine, translating English. Neither of my parents speaks English fluently. A sentence starter could be Eric and Diane's job growing up was blank. All right, let's go ahead and continue. On the Saturday of the appointment, we pulled into the lot of a towering office building in downtown Boston. Poppy had on his nicest jacket, tie, and newly shined shoes. I wore a floral cotton dress and white sandals. Stay close to me, Poppy whispered as we made our way through the sliding glass doors and into the lobby. It's on the 12th floor. We emerged from the elevator into a long carpeted hall. Beneath fluorescent lights, we meandered down the corridor, scanning each door in search of the suite number. We passed an accounting firm, a dental practice. At the end of the hallway was the law office. The attorney's name was engraved in all capital letters across the door's placard. I don't remember the exact name, but it sounded all American, something like Bradley Scott or Dylan Taylor. He definitely wasn't Latino. We stepped inside. There sat a man in his 40s behind a large oak desk covered in papers. He wore a three-piece suit and smiled. The top of his head was bald and shiny. "It's Mr. Guerrero, right?" he said, shaking my father's hand. Then he motioned towards the chairs. "Have a seat, sir. Bienvenido." Phew! This man spoke some Spanish. Not great Spanish, I'd soon learn, but good enough to lighten my translation duties. "Cuéntame tu historia," the lawyer said. "I need to hear your story." Poppy leaned forward in the chair. He peered over at a cheesy poster of Lady Justice on the wall. Below it was the framed Harvard diploma. My dad then looked back at the man and cleared his throat. "Well," he said softly, "I left Colombia so I could earn more money for my family." "How long have you been in the United States?" the man asked. "Since 1981, Poppy asked. "Have you ever applied for citizenship?" My father shook his head. "Do you have a family member who's a citizen?" "Well, my daughter," Poppy said, looking over at me. "And my daughter's mother has a sister here, but she's a resident, not a citizen." The lawyer inhaled deeply. "Well then, we've got a lot of work to do," he said. "I'll need you to fill out this questionnaire." He reached for a maroon binder on the top corner of his desk, opened it, and removed a thick packet. Poppy flipped through it. "So how many months does it take to get a green card?" he asked. The lawyer chuckled. "Mr. Guerrero," he said, "I'm afraid it's years, not months. For some of my clients, it takes 10 years or longer, especially if there's no family member who had a citizenship." All right, we're going to go ahead and answer the next question. How long can it take to obtain a green card? You'll find the information you're looking for in this paragraph. The lawyer chuckled. "Mr. Guerrero," he said, "I'm afraid it's years, not months. For some of my clients, it takes 10 years or longer, especially if there's no family member who has citizenship." A sentence starter could be obtaining a green card can take blank. All right, let's go ahead and continue. My jaw dropped. My dad stared. 10 years, he said. "It can be even longer than that," the man said. "But you never know. You might be one of the lucky ones." My father scowled. "Cuánto cuesta?" he asked. "How much does it cost?" The man didn't seem too bothered by our shock. He shrugged. "That depends on how long your case takes. My rate is 300 an hour." Poppy gasped, rising from his chair. "We don't have that kind of money." "But," the man interrupted, "I can set up a monthly payment plan. I've assisted many people in your predicament." Poppy didn't look convinced. "So what would I need to pay you?" he asked. "We can start with $700, he said. "But why don't you go through these papers? I'm sure I can come up with a plan that fits your budget." We thanked the man and left. Back at home, Mommy rushed out to meet us when we turned into the driveway. "So," she said before we could get out of the car, "how'd it go?" She was thrilled that Poppy was making an effort to find a lawyer and was impatient to hear about it. Poppy sighed. I'll have to find myself a third job. She frowned for a moment. Then, always trying to be upbeat, she said, well, I could take on some extra babysitting, and we do have some savings. True, said Poppy. I'll have to see what I can work out with him. I was in suspense. If this was our chance to get my parents' permanent residency, could we make it work? That week, I had some new homework, tackling that packet. The following Sunday, when my dad and I returned to the lawyer's office, he seemed impressed that we pulled it together so quickly. Very good, Mr. Guerrero, he said, flipping through the pages. Now we can talk about the payment terms. My father spoke firmly. The best we can do is 500 up front. That's the highest I can go. I watched the man's face expectantly. He paused. You've got yourself a deal, Mr. Guerrero, he agreed. My dad's face lit up. I'll start your case tomorrow. The two shook hands vigorously. On the way out, my father paid the attorney. Gracias, he said, holding back tears. I appreciate this very much. On the whole way home, Poppy kept glancing over at me but didn't speak. He didn't have to. We both knew what the meeting could mean for us. The route to citizenship came with setbacks, but at last we'd taken a step forward. I always loved school, but I wasn't the best student. Maybe because I had the attention span of a goldfish. Getting A's in music and gym was easy, and I could sometimes swing a B in English. But when it came to math and science, I was doomed for summer school. My parents pushed me to do well. After all, some of the reason they'd come here was to give us a solid education. But they had their hands so full with working and keeping Eric on track that they couldn't give much attention to my homework, and tutors were too pricey. They recognized I was a good girl, that I took school seriously. So, given everything going on in our house, my average grades had to be sufficient. No cartoons until you're done with math, Poppy would tell me. I'd sit there fidgeting at her kitchen table, my mind wandering off to anything but multiplication tables. I envied those kids who could zip through their assignments. Why can't I be like that? I think. Why can't I concentrate? As hard as I tried, I couldn't not seem to focus. My family's in limbo status didn't make that any easier. My first school, Orenburger Elementary, was great. The campus was clean, the classes solid. Starting in kindergarten, Mommy put me in bilingual classes. She wanted me to learn to read and write in both English and Spanish. I got a little of both languages, but I never felt like I was fully mastering either. I did, however, discover my first musical love, jazz. Around third grade, my chorus teacher played the class legends like Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, and Ella Fitzgerald. I was hooked from the opening note. I'd found my thing, which is good, because fractions certainly weren't it. Elementary school at Orenburger was one thing, my local middle school was another. Standardized test scores were often below the national average. There were too few teachers and too many students. The building was old and falling apart. There were seldom enough books or pencils to go around. Using her own money, my sixth grade English teacher once purchased a batch of spiral notebooks. Write out your vocabulary words in these tonight, she said, handing one to each of those who needed them. It wasn't that our parents wouldn't have bought them for us, it was that they couldn't afford to. Sixth grade, ah yes, the year fights broke out. Kids disrupted class by throwing paper planes and pencils at teachers. Students turned up pregnant, and tensions erupted between rival gang members who'd show up to school with knives. I gotta say, the school was a hot mess. Dedicated teachers, administrators, and social workers worked around the clock to help students reach their academic potential, but they were fighting a tough battle. The issues that plagued our neighborhood didn't just stay in the neighborhood. They showed up in the hallways, in the classrooms, in the cafeteria. Of course, plenty of kids like me wanted to excel. Looking back on it, I can see that many were discouraged. Their lives were difficult. When you have little opportunity or support and struggle to keep food on the table, the American dream is far out of reach. My goal was to keep my head down and get through each day. All right, we're going to go ahead and answer the next question. How is Diane's middle school different from her elementary school? There's a few clues to answer this question. My first school, Orenburger Elementary, was great. The campus clean, the class is solid. So that's the elementary school. And then the middle school is right here. Elementary school at Orenburger was one thing. My local middle school was another. Standardized test scores were often below the national average. There were too few teachers and too many students. The building was old and falling apart. All right, and if you would like to use a sentence starter, you can use her middle school was different from her elementary school because blank. All right, let's go ahead and continue. Luckily, my BFFs, Sabrina, Gabriella, and Dana also attended. Following the final bell, the four of us would meet up and walk home. Stick together, our mothers reminded us, and steer clear of trouble. We knew the drill. We were supposed to have one another's backs if anything wild went down. Want to come over to my place? Sabrina asked as we strolled along the sidewalk. It was a Wednesday afternoon, toward the end of my sixth grade year. My mother's not going to let me, I said. I've got a ton of history. Yeah, me too, Gabriella added. I need to get home. Just as we turned onto my street, these two Puerto Rican girls rolled up on their bikes. One had on Tim's and thick black eyeliner, the other wore booty shorts and had a tattoo of a cross on her chest. I recognized them from campus. The one in the shorts glared at me. What's up, wetback? She sneered. I took a step back. So did Sabrina and Dana. Gabriella didn't budge. Of the four of us, she'd always been the tough one who tolerated zero garbage. Dude, why don't you leave her alone? She snapped, taking the lead. You don't even know us. Shut your mouth, spat the girl. All three of you need to take your flat, ugly faces back to Colombia. My heart was slamming in my chest. All at once, I hauled off down the street, the blood coursing through my veins as I sprinted. Let's get out of here, I shouted. My hands shook as I clutched onto the padded straps of my backpack. TBH, I've always been a bit of a wimp. I didn't know what they wanted with us, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. Sabrina, Dana, and Gabriella were right on my heels. We didn't stop to look back until we'd reached my front door. Thankfully, the mean girls had vanished. We can't let them scare us, said Gabriella out of breath. But I was already shaken up. Once inside, I didn't tell my mother what happened. Instead, I buried my head in my homework, doing my best to forget. That wasn't the first time we'd been bullied. In our area, which was mostly filled with Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, anybody who wasn't in one of their two groups was usually considered a dirty immigrant. We were spat on, cursed at, looked down upon, and perceived as unattractive because of our native Indian features. I know. Other Latino groups look similar. That goes to show how stupid discrimination is, and that the stigma of being undocumented exists even within the Latin community. For the remainder of that year, whenever I spotted the two girls in the cafeteria, I ducked out and avoided eye contact. Rule numero uno in my neighborhood, the best way to win a fight was to avoid it in the first place. As tough as my middle school was, it did have one major thing going for it: extracurricular activities. You name it, I was involved. In fifth grade, I joined the basketball team and chorus. In sixth, I became a cheerleader. In seventh, I signed up for the peer leadership program. I, along with a group of others chosen, attended training sessions on topics such as drug prevention and safe sex. Once a week, we then went around and talked to our classmates about how they could protect themselves. I loved it. For the first time, I felt useful, like I had a voice, a contribution to make, something that set me apart from the bullies with nothing better to do. All right, we're going to answer the next question. What did Diane think was a redeeming quality about her middle school? Make sure you're focusing on the beginning of this paragraph. As tough as my middle school was, it did have one major thing going for it: extracurricular activities. You name it, I was involved. In fifth grade, I joined the basketball team and chorus. And then she just goes on and talks about the other extracurricular activities she joins. Make sure you're using a sentence starter if you need it. You can use she thinks a redeeming quality about middle school is blank. All right, let's go ahead and continue. For most of my childhood, I looked on helplessly as Eric struggled with depression, locking himself in his room. We didn't have the cash to send him to a therapist or counselor. Truth is, emotional wellness was something we, and many others in our community, couldn't afford to think about, no matter how much we struggled with it. A year after leaving school, Eric discovered that he and his longtime girlfriend were expecting a baby. This news didn't go over so well with either of their families. Did I mention our quarters were cramped? Well, Gloria moved in with us a few months into her pregnancy. 5 people in a two-bedroom gets crowded and tense, which led to more arguing between Eric and my parents and between Eric and Gloria. But by June 1996, the newest member of our family arrived. Eric drove home in his Toyota with Gloria and their sweet newborn. The whole way, my brother could hardly keep his eyes on the road as he glanced over his shoulder to check on his princess in the back seat. When the car pulled into the driveway, Mommy and I hurried out front. The baby, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, had her lids tightly shut. "What's her name?" I asked, peeking over the carrier's edge. "It's Erica," Eric told me. He leaned down and pecked her on the forehead, which made her stir a bit and open her eyes. "Isn't she cute?" I nodded, unable to stop grinning. She looked like a living doll. Rosy cheeks, tiny toes, a bald head. She was the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen. In the months following Erica's birth, Eric stepped up like never before. Fatherhood motivated him. He landed work painting houses and mowing lawns. Rather than hanging out late with his buddies, he spent time with Gloria and the baby. In fact, their relationship began going well enough that they decided to marry. Soon after, Gloria began filing the papers to sponsor Eric for citizenship. With a green card, my brother could look for a job with benefits and a better income. Or at least that was the plan. But his old behaviors returned. Maybe it was the blues. Maybe it was the difficulty of providing for his family. On the evenings when he was home, he and Gloria fought constantly. "I need you to help out more with the baby," I once overheard her telling him. "And where were you last night?" Their marriage became so rocky that Gloria and Erica went to live with their parents in Hyde Park. At that point, my brother went from sad to broken. He barricaded himself in his room. When he did drag himself out to the fridge, he and Poppy got into it. As usual, Mommy tried to be a peacemaker. Me, I just sank deeper into fantasies about a life far away from the friction. Deep down, I wanted to be like teenagers on TV. Their biggest problems were whether they'd get asked to the prom, not whether they'd be jumped by haters or have their brother and parents deported. I wanted to be a normal child. The idea of normal for me was embodied by the snazzy towns like Wellesley or Newton that Poppy would sometimes drive us through on his days off. They looked like they were on a different planet than the one I came from. As we weaved our way through the ivy-colored houses, I'd stare from the car windows, imagining what it must be like inside. A child in Wellesley surely couldn't have the same problems as I did. If you were white and wealthy and impeccably manicured, your life had to be perfect, right? The people inside were probably quiet and dainty too, I figured. "Mommy, stop being so loud. White people aren't loud," I'd hiss at her if she was laughing too loudly in the street. The hilarious thing is, I had no idea what white people did or didn't do, or for that matter, how anyone lived behind closed doors. And Lord knows, loud folks come in all colors. But in the culture I was raised in, amid the countless media images I took in as a girl, I got this crazy notion that being white and well-heeled and educated made one better. In the hours before sunup, as Poppy prepared for his first shift, I lay awake on my bed, imagining a magical future that was a universe away from my own. Sometimes I'd imagine us in a house in Wellesley, not even the biggest or most charming house, just a little house that was all ours. But even more than that, my fantasies took place on stage. Closing my eyes, I'd imagine a crowd roaring with applause, a lush velvet curtain rising, a golden spotlight shining down on my beaming face. The older I got, though, the more I noticed that the performers who were getting starring roles were not Latina. In fact, I didn't see myself or my experiences anywhere in pop culture, not on TV or in movies or in books. And that hurt. It suggested that other people's looks and experiences were more important to show than mine, that mine were somehow inferior, less deserving of attention and respect. Could a brown girl from an immigrant family ever be center stage, I wondered? Only one in a million girls reaches a dream like that, but in some small corner of my soul, I secretly nurtured the feeling that I could be that girl. Sometimes I felt all the self-confidence in the world. Other times I felt like I was crazy for even daring to daydream. My mother was an early believer in me. "You're a shining star," she'd proclaim each time I serenaded her and my dad. When I was a little girl, Mommy's encouragement made me blush and giggle. But starting at around 12, my response shifted. For some reason, her words began to sting. "You don't know anything," I burst out one night after she'd announced I was destined for Hollywood. "Stop saying that." My mother, stunned by my reaction, just stared at me. Mommy hadn't changed. It was me who was shifting. I yearned to perform, to find my way into the limelight. And yet the likelihood of that happening felt so small. Like, I'm talented, sure, but look where we are, how we have to live. Besides that, I could probably count on one hand how many Latinas were on TV. Of course, I'm not going to make it. So I placed a tight lid over the top of my dreams and hid them away. But like fireflies, their light still burned inside me. All right, we're going to go ahead and answer the last question. What did Diane often fantasize about? Make sure you're paying attention to these few sentences right here. But even more than that, my fantasies took place on stage. Closing my eyes, I'd imagine a crowd roaring with applause, a lush velvet curtain rising, a golden spotlight shining down on my beaming face. You can use a sentence starter. Diane often fantasizes about blank. All right, everybody, that is it for chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, take care.